You didn't put him in your top 5 of people.
No, he's not.
Really? Wasn't he at one point?
Yeah.
What happens when the one person nobody wants to play with decides he's had enough? Because if the reports floating around online are even half true, 50 Cent is once again showing the entire internet exactly why disrespect and his name should never be used in the same sentence. And this time, people are saying the fallout is messier, colder, and way more personal than anybody expected. For years now, every time somebody takes a slick shot at 50, whether it's on a podcast, on Instagram, in an interview, or through some behind-the-scenes industry whisper, somehow the story always ends the same way.
That's the problem. You let someone lick your ass and look what happens.
Receipts start appearing, old clips get dug up, private tension suddenly becomes public humiliation. And before anybody can even explain what they really meant, social media is already in flames. Fans are picking sides, and the person who thought they were just throwing harmless shade is suddenly trending for all the wrong reasons. Now, once again, such reports are coming out that another wave of names may have learned that lesson the hard way. From rap rivals to former friends, from people who allegedly
with it.
Do you regret taking your beef with Randall to social media?
No.
joked too hard, to others who may have underestimated just how long 50 can hold on to disrespect. The internet is now piecing together what many are calling a full-on pattern. And if that pattern is real, then this isn't just pettiness anymore. This is strategy. Because let's be honest, 50 doesn't just clap back the way regular celebrities do. No, when his name gets dragged, people say he turns it into an event. One post becomes 10. One joke becomes a public breakdown. One careless comment becomes a weeks-long embarrassment that fans can't stop replaying. And according to all this online chatter, some of the ugliest moments may have happened when the cameras weren't even supposed to be rolling. Fans are shocked, emotions are running high, and the internet is already calling this another masterclass in revenge. But the real question is 50 Cent simply defending himself the only way he knows how? Or has he turned disrespect into a personal sport where nobody is safe once they cross the line? Because once these moments started resurfacing, things got ugly fast. The wild part about all of this is that whenever these kinds of stories start making rounds online, the same pattern keeps showing up over and over again. Somebody says something slick, somebody tries to clown 50, somebody thinks they are getting off a clean little joke for the timeline, and then somehow, some way, the entire thing flips. Suddenly, the person who thought they had the room laughing is the one being laughed at, and fans start saying the same thing every single time. Why do people keep underestimating him like they don't know how this ends? And that is exactly why so many people are locked into this latest wave of conversation. Because according to the chatter online, this is not being treated like random rap beef or harmless celebrity shade anymore. People are framing it like a warning. They are saying once 50 feels disrespected, he does not just respond emotionally. He responds like somebody building a case. And that is what makes it so uncomfortable for whoever gets caught on the other side of it. Because most celebrities react in the heat of the moment. They rant, they go live, they tweet angry, they post a quote, then they cool off. But when 50's name starts getting dragged, fans say his energy is different. He gets quiet first, and that quiet is what scares people. Because once he goes quiet, that is usually when the internet starts whispering that he is watching, collecting, and waiting for the exact right second to make the other person regret ever saying anything in the first place. That is exactly the kind of energy people say showed up when one industry conversation reportedly crossed a line that should have never been crossed. Now, to be clear, this is commentary based on the reports, reactions, and online discussion that have been circulating. But according to those reports, one of the first names fans dragged back into this whole conversation was Steve Stout. And if you know anything about the way fans tell this story, they do not tell it like some simple disagreement. They tell it like it was one of the earliest examples of 50 showing the world that he takes public disrespect very, very personally. Because Steve was not some random internet troll or faceless hater. In the way people online explain it, this was somebody from the same larger world, somebody with history, connections, business ties, and real industry weight, which is why fans say it hit differently when his name allegedly came up in a conversation where 50's relevance, artistry, and impact were being talked around like they belonged in the past. And that is where the emotional part of all this comes in, because if there is one thing people say 50 cannot stand, it is being spoken about like he is finished.
While he is still very much in the room,
Fans have always said that under all the jokes and trolling, there is one pressure point that always sets him off: being publicly reduced, being made to seem smaller than he sees himself. And once that happens, the situation usually stops being professional and starts getting personal very quickly. So when those clips and those quotes started getting reposted and discussed again, the reaction online was immediate. Fans were saying, hold on, this was never just about a list or some ranking. This was ego, respect, legacy, and image, all colliding in front of everybody. And when men in this industry feel like their name is being played with publicly, especially in a culture where reputation is currency, the temperature rises fast. People close to the culture were allegedly saying the real issue was not just what was said, but who said it and where it was said. Because one thing about public platforms, whether it is radio, podcasts, interviews, or social media, once your words leave your mouth, they do not belong to you anymore. They belong to the internet. And the internet loves turning one careless comment into a full-blown humiliation campaign. That is why fans say the alleged confrontation that followed became bigger than the original comment itself. Because in the retelling of this story, 50 did not let it stay as some quiet behind-the-scenes annoyance. According to all the talk online, he wanted energy to be matched face to face. And that is what always gives these moments their extra edge. It's not just that he allegedly gets upset, it's that people say he wants the discomfort to be felt in real time. And that is what has fans so fascinated with his whole image to this day, because whether people love him, fear him, or are completely exhausted by him, they all seem to agree on one thing: he does not move like someone who wants peace more than he wants the last word. One fan on social media summed it up in a way that really captures why these stories keep exploding. They wrote, "The problem with 50 is he never wants to just win. He wants the other person to look crazy while he wins." And honestly, that one line explains almost everything, because it's never enough for the other person to simply apologize, backtrack, or try to smooth things over. By the time the machine gets going, fans are already waiting to see how ugly the public fallout is going to get. And once people started revisiting those old industry moments, the internet did what it always does. It started pulling up receipts, connecting patterns, and asking the bigger question: how many times has this actually happened? How many people thought they were just saying something harmless, only to find themselves dragged into a whole new chapter of 50's revenge catalog? And that is where things really started escalating, because the moment fans began revisiting one story, they immediately jumped to another name that always sends social media into chaos whenever it gets mentioned alongside his: Vivica Fox. And let's be honest, anytime exes get involved, the drama automatically gets 10 times worse. Because industry beef is one thing, but once old romance, bruised egos, and unresolved bitterness enter the picture, emotions run high in a completely different way. Fans are shocked every single time this chapter gets brought up, because what makes it so messy is not just the public back and forth, it's the feeling that there was always something unfinished sitting under the surface. For years, people have treated that old relationship like a pop culture time capsule. Two huge personalities, a flashy public romance, and then a breakup that never really seemed to cool all the way down. And whenever that story gets mentioned, fans immediately start arguing over the same question: was it ever truly over emotionally, or did both sides just get better at hiding the resentment until one of them finally snapped again? Because according to how this whole thing has been discussed online, what made that situation explode was not simply a joke or a random shady remark. It was the kind of comment that attacks identity, pride, and image all at once. And if there is one thing 50 supporters always say, it's that he can take a lot of things, but once you try to publicly frame him in a way that makes him feel exposed or embarrassed, all bets are off. That is why so many people still talk about this moment like it was a turning point. Because when an ex speaks on you publicly, especially in a way that gets the room reacting, it creates a different kind of sting. It's not just internet drama anymore. It feels intimate, it feels humiliating, and most importantly, it feels like somebody who once knew you personally is now using that closeness as a weapon. And that kind of disrespect always lands harder. Fans were saying the tension in that whole situation was obvious, because it was not just about one interview or one clapback. Was about years of little jabs, unspoken bitterness, and the kind of unresolved energy that only comes from two people who once shared private space, but can now barely share public air with sparks flying. One fan posted, "When an ex embarrasses you in public, you don't hear the joke the same way everybody else does. You hear the history behind it." And honestly, that is exactly why this whole chapter still feels so explosive whenever people bring it back up. Because once that line was crossed, the internet did what it always does. It stopped treating it like celebrity gossip and started turning it into sides. Suddenly, women were saying he had it coming. Men were saying she took it too far. Blogs were clipping every reaction. Comment sections were turning into battlegrounds. And what started as one messy exchange became one of those cultural moments that fans still reference years later whenever the topic of never disrespect 50 publicly comes up. And in the middle of all that chaos, one thing became painfully obvious. Once personal feelings mix with public embarrassment, nobody involved really walks away clean. Because even when the joke lands, even when the room laughs, even when the audience thinks they are just watching entertainment, there is almost always a second layer happening underneath. Pride gets wounded, old resentment gets stirred up, private pain gets dressed up as public comedy, and by the time everybody realizes how deep the cut actually was, the damage is already done. That is what makes these moments feel bigger than ordinary celebrity mess. They are never just isolated incidents. They are emotional detonations with years of unresolved tension packed inside them. And the family was left divided, the fan base was split, and the internet kept feeding the fire, because every time people thought the smoke had cleared, another old clip, another old quote, or another old insult would come floating right back to the surface. And once fans started reliving all of that, the conversation moved into an even uglier direction, because if public embarrassment over words is bad, according to the reports and all the online reactions, things got much nastier once money entered the picture. Because if there's one thing people say 50 takes even more seriously than disrespect, it is feeling played financially. And once that line gets crossed, the gloves usually come off. Because money changes the temperature of everything. When somebody talks crazy, that's one kind of insult. But when somebody allegedly smiles in your face, does business with you, benefits from your name, and then leaves you feeling like you got finessed, fans say that's when 50's whole energy shifts from petty to surgical. And that is exactly why the Randall Emmett chapter always gets dragged back into these conversations whenever people start listing the moments where things got ugly fast. Because according to the reports and all the online retelling, fans did not see that situation as simple business fallout. They saw it as the perfect example of what happens when 50 believes somebody has mixed debt with debt. And in celebrity culture, that combination is deadly, because the internet can forgive a bad deal. It can even forgive a messy breakup. But the second a story starts sounding like one person allegedly thought they could use another person's brand, status, or loyalty while quietly moving funny behind the scenes, social media immediately turns it into a character issue. And once fans frame something as character, not just conflict, the person in the hot seat usually has no control over how ugly it gets after that. People online were saying that what made this situation hit so hard was how public it became so fast, because most people, especially in entertainment, would try to keep a money dispute hidden behind lawyers, managers, private calls, and carefully worded statements. But that's not the version of these stories fans say they associate with 50. They say he doesn't always believe in quiet correction. He believes in pressure. And pressure is exactly what the internet claimed showed up here. One fan posted, 50 doesn't chase you in private if he feels like you disrespected him in public. He drags you where everybody can see. And honestly, that line explains why these moments keep becoming content in themselves. Because once a disagreement becomes public spectacle, it stops being just between two people. Now it belongs to the blogs, the reactions, the memes, the commentary channels, the podcasts, and every fan page waiting for the next screenshot to drop. And that's where the emotional humiliation becomes just as important as the money itself. Because according to the online chatter, what people remember most about that whole saga is not even the amount. It is the desperation, the pleading tone people say they could feel in the texts, the scrambling, the visible panic once the joke started landing too hard and too
publicly. Fans are shocked every time they revisit it, because the energy reportedly shifted from "this is a disagreement" to "this person wants this to stop immediately." And that is always where 50 seems to become the most dangerous in the court of public opinion. Because when the other side starts looking rattled, he allegedly gets calmer. When they start trying to clean things up, he gets funnier. When they start hoping it dies down, that is usually when fans say he posts something even more humiliating. And whether that image is fully fair or not, that is the reputation people online keep reinforcing every single time one of these stories resurfaces. What makes it even more uncomfortable is how many people say situations like that reveal a darker truth about celebrity relationships. Because so much of Hollywood is built on smiling partnerships, handshakes, fake loyalty, mutual use, and private resentment. Everybody is cool while the cameras are on, while the checks are clearing, while the projects are moving. But the second one side feels cheated, neglected, or disrespected, all that fake polish falls off instantly. And fans love watching that polish crack. Because underneath every polished red carpet friendship, people assume there are bruised egos, hidden jealousy, unpaid favors, and private frustrations waiting for the right spark. And when that spark finally hits, audiences cannot look away. That is why stories like this spread so hard. They don't just feel like celebrity gossip. They feel like proof that the glamorous image was never as clean as it looked. One industry watcher even commented, "People in entertainment will forgive betrayal before they forgive public embarrassment." And that line really sits at the center of all of this. Because the money may have started the tension, but the public embarrassment is what made the whole thing unforgettable. And that's the exact reason so many people now say 50's real power is not even the insult itself. It's his understanding of humiliation as entertainment. He seems to know exactly how to turn another person's bad moment into a running storyline the internet cannot stop refreshing. And once that starts, the person on the other side is no longer just defending their business, they are defending their dignity. And defending your dignity online is almost impossible once the jokes are already winning. But if fans thought that whole money situation was ugly, the internet says things got even more reckless once another name entered the chat, Jim Jones. Because now the energy was not just, "you owe me" or "you crossed me." Now the vibe was straight up exposure. And according to the way this story has been bouncing around online, this is one of those moments fans point to when they say 50 does not just want to argue with people. He wants to embarrass them with details they never expected to become public. And that is where everything gets way more uncomfortable. Because rap beef, celebrity shade, and industry sneak dissing are all things the culture is used to. But once business details, behind-the-scenes problems, lease drama, studio issues, and private mess allegedly start leaking into the public arena, fans immediately react differently. Suddenly, this is not just entertainment anymore. Now it feels invasive. Now it feels humiliating in a way that cannot be wrapped away. And that is why people online have been talking about this part of the story like it was one of the coldest examples of 50's zero-tolerance image. Because in the way fans tell it, this was not just about responding to disrespect. This was about making sure the disrespectful person looked unstable, unprepared, and exposed in front of everybody. And once that perception takes hold online, it's brutal. Because social media does not just laugh at the joke, it builds a whole narrative around it. If a person looks flustered once, now they are spiraling. If one private issue gets exposed, now suddenly they are broke, finished, or falling apart, whether that's fully true or not. The internet doesn't care about balance, it cares about spectacle. And once 50's name is attached to a spectacle, people assume the person on the other side is about to have a very long week. That is why fans were eating up every little detail around that whole situation. Because to them, it looked like another case of someone underestimating what happens when they make things personal with him. And in a world where image is everything, being publicly framed as messy behind the scenes can hurt way more than any diss track ever could. One fan wrote, 50 don't even have to out-rap you anymore. He'll just out-embarrass you. And honestly, that's exactly the reputation that seems to follow these moments now. He doesn't always need bars, a press run, or a formal response. Sometimes all it takes is one ugly detail landing in the wrong corner of the internet, and the damage basically handles itself. And what makes
these situations even harder to watch is how quickly bystanders start choosing sides. Because the second a messy detail goes public, everybody around it gets dragged in too. Friends start getting asked questions, associates start getting tagged, podcast hosts start laughing nervously, fan pages start making compilations, and suddenly a private embarrassment has become a public event with a full audience. The family was left divided, fan communities were tearing each other apart, and some people were even saying this whole pattern says more about the culture than it does about 50 himself. Because if humiliation keeps working this well every time, then maybe the real issue is how addicted the audience has become to seeing people publicly broken down. That is the darker side of all this. Because sure, on the surface, it looks funny, it looks entertaining, it looks like he got him. But underneath all the memes, what you are often really watching is somebody's confidence, image, and control being stripped away in front of millions of strangers. And once that happens, there is almost no clean way to recover. Because even if the person laughs it off later, even if they try to act unbothered, even if they go on live and say none of it mattered, the clip still exists, the jokes still exist, the comment sections still exist. And in the internet era, humiliation does not expire. It just waits to trend again the next time your name comes up. And maybe that's why so many people are suddenly revisiting all these old moments at once. Because according to the reports, the newer stories floating around have reminded fans that this has never really been about isolated incidents. This is a whole pattern, a full blueprint, a running theme that keeps repeating itself every time somebody gets a little too comfortable speaking on him publicly. And just when people thought the conversation could not get more personal, it swerved into the one chapter that always makes fans the most uncomfortable to discuss. Because if there's anything uglier than dragging your rivals, embarrassing your business partners, or exposing industry enemies, it's when the conflict reaches your own blood. And once that happened, the internet stopped calling it petty and started calling it painful. Because when the story turns from enemies to family, the whole mood changes. Fans can laugh at celebrity beef. They can joke about diss tracks, petty posts, shady interviews, and public embarrassment all day long. But the second a father and son end up in the same cycle of humiliation, people stop watching with pure entertainment energy and start watching with discomfort. And that is exactly why this chapter always lands heavier than the others. Because according to the way these reports and online discussions keep resurfacing, the Marquise situation is the one people point to when they want to argue that 50's zero-tolerance approach does not just stop at rivals or outsiders. Fans say once he feels disrespected, hurt, or publicly challenged, the line between personal pain and public performance starts disappearing. And when that line disappears inside a family dynamic, everything gets darker. Because now this is not just about ego. Now it's about abandonment, resentment, old wounds, and years of unresolved emotion that were clearly never dealt with behind closed doors. And that's what makes this whole situation so hard for people to look away from. Every time those clips, interviews, and reactions start making rounds again, fans are shocked because it never feels like simple shade. It feels like heartbreak wearing the mask of internet drama. And heartbreak always looks uglier when men try to turn it into jokes. One of the saddest things about this whole chapter is how split the audience always becomes. There are people who say a grown son should stop dragging childhood support conversations into public spaces. Then there are others who say a father with that level of wealth and influence should have found a softer, more human way to handle years of visible pain. And because both sides feel emotionally loaded, the conversation always turns ugly fast. That's why the internet never seems able to discuss this situation lightly. Because beneath the sarcasm, the memes, and the public back and forth, there is clearly a much bigger emotional wound sitting underneath everything. And once people started revisiting those clips where child support, resentment, and old family bitterness were all being aired out again, the entire conversation became less about who won and more about who was hurting worse. Because no matter how people try to frame it, there is something deeply uncomfortable about seeing a father and son talk around each other through podcasts, interviews, captions, and internet jokes instead of talking to each other directly. Fans are shocked because it doesn't feel like ordinary celebrity mess. It feels like watching years of pain harden into
Hostility. One fan wrote, "The worst part is neither of them sounds like they are joking anymore." And honestly, that line says everything. Because once a family issue gets fed to the internet enough times, it starts changing shape. What may have once been disappointment becomes pride. What may have once been sadness becomes mockery. What may have once been a private hope for reconciliation becomes a public performance where both sides are trying not to look weak. And weakness is something this culture punishes immediately. That is what makes all of this even more painful. Because in rap, in celebrity culture, and especially in male public image, vulnerability is often treated like losing. So instead of saying, "that hurt me," people posture. Instead of saying, "I wish this was different," they attack. Instead of saying, "I'm still carrying pain from that," they laugh, troll, or throw another shot. And fans keep consuming it because it is dramatic, messy, and emotionally loaded in a way that feels almost too real. The family was left divided, the audience was divided, and people around the situation reportedly kept getting pulled into the tension whether they wanted to or not. Hosts were reacting awkwardly, interviewers were pushing uncomfortable questions, fan pages were choosing sides, and the internet did what it always does with family pain. It turned it into a debate. But family pain is never just a debate to the people living it. That is why this chapter still hangs over all the others like a shadow. Because no matter how funny some of the comments may look to outsiders, the emotional cost underneath them feels heavier. You can recover from looking foolish in a business dispute.
You can recover from getting embarrassed in a rap feud. But once your personal family fractures become part of your public identity, that damage sits differently. And maybe that's exactly why people keep saying 50's reactions hit harder than normal celebrity responses. Because fans do not just see anger in them, they see old hurt, they see control, they see somebody who would rather dominate the narrative than admit where the pain really lives. And if that's true, then the whole zero-tolerance image starts looking less like strength and more like armor. But before the internet could even fully sit in that uncomfortable family tension, the conversation reportedly took another turn and landed right back in rap politics, where ego, legacy, and humiliation always collide in the loudest way possible. Because if there's one thing guaranteed to set the internet on fire, it's when 50's name gets dragged into a rap challenge, and people start asking the same dangerous question. Is anybody still capable of getting him to really respond? And according to all the online chatter, that's exactly what started bubbling once T's name got folded back into the conversation. Now, to be clear again, this is commentary based on the reports, clips, and reactions circulating online, not a claim that every rumor happened exactly as the internet tells it. But if you looked at the blogs, fan pages, and reaction channels, people were talking like the tension was becoming impossible to ignore. And once fans smell unresolved disrespect between two giant personalities, they immediately start treating it like a heavyweight collision waiting to happen. Because this was not being framed online like some playful lyrical sparring. No, people were talking like this had real bitterness under it. Old pride, bruised masculinity, competitive resentment, and maybe most dangerous of all, a feeling that both sides wanted the public to know exactly how little respect they had left for the other. And whenever that kind of energy enters the room, the internet becomes feral. People started revisiting old interviews, reposting past comments, dissecting captions, and reading into every little move. One side was saying 50 had outgrown the whole rap battle lane and was now operating from a different level of power. The other side was saying that ducking direct smoke while trolling online was not dominance, it was avoidance. And just like that, fans were once again split into camps, ready for another long, ugly cycle. What makes this chapter so interesting is that it hits on one of the biggest insecurities in hip-hop: relevance. Because once artists reach a certain point in their career, every conflict stops being just about the conflict itself. Now it's about legacy. Who still matters? Who still commands attention? Who still has the power to shake the room without even dropping music? And according to the online reactions, that's exactly why this tension kept getting framed like something bigger than just insults. One fan said, "The real fight is not over who raps better. It's over whose name still controls the conversation." And that might be the most honest thing anybody said about this whole mess. Because that is what so many of these moments really come down to.
Underneath all the noise, control, not just over another person, but over the spotlight itself. And if there is one thing people believe about 50, it is that he never wants to be in a situation where somebody else gets to define him publicly without consequences. If you say something crazy, he allegedly wants to make sure your words cost you something. If you challenge him, he wants the challenge to age badly. If you throw a shot, he wants your own image to become the punchline before you can even enjoy the moment. And that is exactly why so many people online were calling this whole chapter another mind game instead of a simple feud. Because from the way fans were talking, the most disrespectful thing was not even necessarily a loud response. It was the possibility of no response at all. And in hip-hop, silence can be more insulting than a diss track. Because if one person is out there swinging, talking, posting, baiting, and trying to force a reaction, while the other one acts like none of it is real effort, the internet immediately reads that as a power move, and that is where the humiliation starts becoming psychological. Fans are shocked every time they watch that dynamic play out, because it creates the same ugly question again and again. Is this still a fair fight if one person is battling for respect while the other one is battling for amusement? And once that question enters the room, the whole energy gets nasty. Because now nobody is just arguing about bars or old beef anymore. Now people are arguing about status, value, and who the culture still sees as dangerous. And just when fans thought that was already messy enough, the conversation drifted toward another chapter that perfectly shows how low things can go once pettiness and public embarrassment become the main weapons. Because one thing about 50, according to the internet, is that he does not always come for your music first. Sometimes he comes for your image. Sometimes he comes for your flex. And sometimes he comes for the exact thing you thought was making you look untouchable.
Because once image becomes the battlefield, the damage hits differently. Rap fans can argue all day about who had the better diss, who won the back and forth, who got the last laugh in a caption war. But when somebody's whole public flex gets turned into a joke, that embarrassment sticks to them in a way music usually doesn't. And that is exactly why the French Montana chapter still gets brought up whenever people start listing the coldest examples of 50 turning disrespect into humiliation. Because according to the way fans and reaction pages keep telling it, this was not just about words. This was about status, presentation, the illusion of being bigger, richer, hotter, and more untouchable than the next guy. And if there is one thing celebrity culture depends on, it is that illusion holding together. The second that illusion cracks, everything starts looking shaky. That is why people online always talk about this kind of situation like it was such a brutal move, because when a celebrity buys something flashy, posts it, and uses it to reinforce their image, they are not just showing off a car or a chain or a lifestyle. They are feeding a fantasy. They are telling the audience, look how high above normal life I am. And when somebody else comes in and allegedly starts questioning the details behind that fantasy, the audience gets vicious fast. Because the internet loves nothing more than a fallen flex. One minute a person looks untouchable, the next minute people are zooming in, making jokes, asking questions, and suddenly that same flex becomes evidence that they were trying too hard all along. Fans are shocked every single time, because what starts as simple shade somehow turns into a full dissection of another person's image. And that is what people say 50 understands better than almost anybody. He allegedly knows how to attack the part of celebrity culture people are most emotionally attached to, the version of themselves they want the world to believe. One fan put it perfectly when they said, 50 doesn't just embarrass people, he strips the cool off them. And honestly, that's one of the sharpest ways to describe why these moments hit so hard. Because being called broke, fake, corny, thirsty, desperate, or exaggerated in hip-hop culture is not just an insult, it's identity damage. And once those labels start sticking publicly, people begin reading everything you do through that lens. Suddenly, your confidence looks forced, your jewelry looks rented, your posts look performative, your interviews sound defensive, your success starts getting questioned even if you are still doing numbers. And by that point, you are not just fighting a person anymore, you are fighting a narrative. And narratives are almost impossible to beat once the audience has already decided what role you play in the story. That is why fans say 50's zero-tolerance reputation
Getting stronger every time one of these stories resurfaces, because whether people agree with his methods or not, they keep seeing the same result. Once he decides to frame you a certain way publicly, the internet often does the rest for him. And if that was not enough, things reportedly got even more layered when the conversation started drifting into the older Cameron and Fat Joe chapters too. And that is where the whole thing stops looking like a string of random moments and starts feeling like a long-running pattern that has followed him across eras. Because now people are not just looking at one or two ugly situations. They are looking at decades of conflict and asking a much bigger question. Has 50 always treated disrespect like something that has to be publicly punished in order for him to feel in control again? And if the answer to that is yes, then a lot of these stories start connecting in a way that feels way deeper than internet pettiness. Because with Cam, what fans often point to is not just the tension itself. It is the calmness, the business-like tone, the feeling that while everybody else was trying to make things loud and dramatic, 50 allegedly wanted to make the other person look emotional, impulsive, and less composed. And that's a very different kind of disrespect. Because sometimes the most humiliating thing is not being screamed at. Sometimes it is being handled like you are not even worth the emotion. That is why so many people say his coldest move is not necessarily going the loudest. It's making the other person look like they are the only one losing composure. Because once that dynamic locks in publicly, fans start reading one side as in control and the other side is spiraling, and that framing can be devastating. Fat Joe's chapter reportedly gets discussed in a similar way too, but with even more emotional weight, because it touched on something even deeper than ego, loyalty. And if there is one thing that repeatedly shows up in these stories, it's how deeply 50 appears to react when he feels somebody chose the wrong side. Because disrespect is not always about a direct insult. Sometimes in these worlds, disrespect means association. It means standing too close to the wrong person, doing business with the wrong camp, showing love to someone he sees as an enemy. And once that happens, the fallout can stretch way beyond one moment or one comment. That is why fans keep saying these situations always get uglier than they should, because underneath the trolling and public jokes, a lot of these conflicts seem rooted in something much more emotional than people first assume. Betrayal, insecurity, pride, the need to prove you cannot be played with,
the need to show the whole room that crossing you comes with consequences. And honestly, that need might be the real center of all this. Because if you really look at the way fans talk about these moments, they don't just describe 50 as petty. They describe him like someone who has built an identity around never being seen as weak, never being seen as easy to disrespect, and never allowing another person to feel too comfortable after crossing the line. And once a person builds their image around that kind of emotional code, every slight starts feeling bigger than it might actually be. Every joke becomes a challenge. Every insult becomes a test. Every disagreement becomes a power struggle. And that's exactly why the internet keeps circling back to these stories again and again, because they're not just entertaining. They reveal something. They reveal how celebrity masculinity often works. They reveal how power is performed. They reveal how much of public conflict is really just private insecurity wearing expensive clothes and speaking through microphones. And that's what makes this final chapter of the whole conversation hit the hardest. Because once fans started connecting all of these moments together, from industry disrespect to ex-drama, from money issues to family tension, from rap rivalries to image warfare, one name inevitably came back into the center of the storm again: Diddy. And once that name enters any 50 Cent conversation, the tone changes instantly. Because now this is no longer just about jokes, pettiness, or embarrassing somebody online. Now the conversation starts feeling heavier, darker, and way more uncomfortable. Because according to all the reports, reactions, and online discussion that have been circulating for a while now, fans have started reframing that entire dynamic in a way that makes a lot of old comments suddenly sound less funny and more unsettling. And that's what has the internet talking the loudest right now, because people are saying that out of all the names that have ever been attached to this disrespect 50 and pay for it pattern, this one may be the most disturbing of them all. Not because it was the pettiest, not because it was the funniest, but because if even part of what people have been
saying online is true, then some of those years of jokes and public discomfort may have been pointing to something much darker sitting underneath. And that is why so many fans are now going back through old interviews, old clips, old comments, and old moments with completely different eyes. Because what used to look like trolling now looks eerie to some people. What used to look like comedy now feels loaded. What used to feel like another petty celebrity obsession now feels like it may have been tied to a much deeper discomfort that people around the culture either ignored, laughed off, or did not want to deal with directly. Fans are shocked, emotions are running high, and the internet is once again doing what it always does when a messy old story suddenly feels relevant in a new way. It is pulling every thread it can find. And once all those threads started connecting, the entire conversation stopped being about whether 50 takes disrespect too seriously. Because now people are asking something else entirely. What if he was not just reacting? What if, in his own messy, aggressive, chaotic way, he had been trying to tell the room something all along? What makes that question so uncomfortable is that it forces people to rewatch the whole story from a completely different angle. Because if all of this was just celebrity pettiness, then it stays funny. It stays digestible. It stays in that safe little box of entertainment where everybody can laugh, argue in the comments, and move on. But the second people start wondering whether some of these long-running tensions were rooted in something more serious than simple disrespect, the mood changes instantly. And that is exactly why this last stretch of the conversation has the internet feeling so divided. Because one side is saying, 50 has always known how to weaponize discomfort and turn suspicion into a storyline. They argue that he understands exactly how to keep himself in the center of attention by making other people look strange, shady, or unstable in public. To them, this whole pattern is not bravery, it's strategy, it's branding. It's a man who knows how to keep his enemies, exes, rivals, and critics trapped inside a never-ending cycle where he always seems to control the narrative. But then there is the other side. The side saying, maybe the reason so many of these moments still feel so charged is because some of them were never just jokes in the first place. Maybe some of the tension people laughed at was actually real discomfort. Maybe some of the petty comments fans turned into memes were attached to deeper unease that people in the culture did not know how to address directly, so they did what the internet always does. They laughed first and asked questions later. And if that is true, then this whole zero tolerance image becomes a lot more complicated than it first appears. Because now it's not just about a celebrity who cannot let things go. Now it's about a public figure who may have spent years using mockery, pressure, and humiliation as his way of dealing with situations that made him feel threatened, disrespected, used, or deeply uncomfortable. And once you look at it that way, all these moments start connecting emotionally, not just dramatically.
That is what makes the pattern so fascinating and so messy at the same time. Because every chapter looks different on the surface. One moment it's a business issue. The next, it's an ex saying too much. Then it's a rival trying to score points. Then it's a family fracture turning public. Then it's another celebrity getting their image cracked open in front of the whole internet. But underneath all of it, the emotional engine always seems to be the same. Control. That is the word fans keep circling back to without even always realizing it. Because once you strip away the money, the jokes, the memes, the interviews, the flexic, and the internet noise, what a lot of people are really reacting to in these stories is the same repeated dynamic. The moment 50 feels like somebody is trying to control how he is seen, he reportedly pushes back by trying to control how they are seen instead. And that is where things get ugly fast every single time. Because if somebody insults you and you insult them back, that's one thing. But if somebody embarrasses you and your response is to publicly dismantle their image, expose their weak points, and turn their discomfort into a months-long public spectacle, now you're operating on a completely different emotional level. And that is why so many people online keep saying the same thing. You don't have to like how he moves, but you cannot pretend he doesn't understand the game better than most people around him. Because the game has changed. It's not just about who can rap better anymore. It's not just about who has the bigger record or the louder comeback. It's about who can win the narrative war, who can control the clip, who can shape the meme, who can
frame the story before the other side even realizes the audience has already chosen a villain. And in that kind of world, 50 has spent years proving that he is not just a participant, he is one of the architects. That is why these stories keep surviving, even years later, because they are not just random celebrity incidents that happened once and disappeared. They have become part of a larger mythology around him, a reputation, a warning label, almost like an unwritten rule floating around the culture that says, if you are going to speak on his name, you better be ready for the possibility that he is not just going to answer you, he may turn your entire week into content. And honestly, that might be the real reason these stories keep going viral again and again. Because people are not just watching for the drama, they are watching for the power dynamic. They are watching to see who folds first. They are watching to see whether the next person who takes a shot actually understands what kind of machine they may have just activated. And deep down, a lot of people probably already know the answer. Because history keeps showing the same thing. People get comfortable. They think they can get one joke off. They think they can question him publicly. They think they can embarrass him and move on. And then suddenly, the tone changes. Receipts appear. Old clips resurface. Private tensions become public. Allies start getting nervous. Fans are shocked. Emotions run high. The family is left divided. The blogs go crazy. And once that cycle begins, nobody really looks clean by the end of it. Which is probably the darkest truth sitting underneath all of this. Because for all the laughs, for all the memes, for all the savage one-liners and humiliating clapbacks, almost every one of these moments leaves some kind of emotional wreckage behind. Someone's pride gets crushed. Someone's image gets damaged. Someone's private pain gets turned into public entertainment. Someone's unresolved history gets reopened in front of millions of strangers. And the internet, of course, keeps eating. That is the part people do not always sit with long enough. Because as entertaining as these stories are, they also reveal something kind of brutal about the culture itself. They reveal how much we reward humiliation, how quickly we turn pain into content, how easily we call something iconic when what we are really watching is emotional warfare dressed up as entertainment. And maybe that's why this whole title keeps hitting people so hard. 50 Cent destroys anyone who disrespects him. Because when you really think about it, that sentence is not just dramatic clickbait. It's a whole reputation, a whole mythology, a whole internet identity built over years of moments where the line between defending yourself and publicly destroying somebody else got blurrier and blurrier every single time. And now with all these stories circulating again, with fans replaying old moments, revisiting old wounds, and arguing over whether he is justified or just ruthless, the same question is back on the table one more time. Is 50 Cent really just the ultimate master of clapbacks and control, or has he become somebody who knows exactly how to make another person's worst public moment part of his brand? Because depending on who you ask, that answer changes everything. And maybe that's exactly why people still can't stop watching. Because whether you see him as calculated, petty, brilliant, dangerous, wounded, strategic, or all of the above, one thing seems to stay true in almost every version of these stories floating around online. Once he feels disrespected, peace usually leaves the room first, and the ugly part starts right after. And after everything you just heard, this is where it really gets interesting. Because at the end of the day, all of this is based on the reports, reactions, and conversations circulating online.
but the patterns people are pointing out feel way too consistent to ignore. Every time his name gets tested, something happens. Maybe not always the same way, maybe not always at the same level, but enough times for fans to start calling it a rule instead of coincidence. So now the question is not just about one moment or one person anymore. It's about you. Do you think 50 Cent is justified when he responds like this? Is he simply protecting his name in an industry where disrespect can cost you everything? Or has he taken it too far, turning every situation into public humiliation just to prove a point? Because depending on how you see it, he's either the smartest player in the game or the most dangerous one. And honestly, the comments are already divided. Some people are saying nobody should ever play with his name if they are not ready for the consequences. Others are saying there's a difference between defending yourself and destroying someone's image in front of the whole world. So I want to hear from you. If someone disrespects you,
Publicly, would you handle it quietly? Or would you make sure the whole world sees what happens next? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation is not ending anytime soon. And if you enjoyed this kind of deep, dramatic breakdown where we unpack what is really going on behind these viral stories, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss when things get messy again. Because trust me, in this world, they always do.